In 2004, Chris Anderson, the editor of Wired magazine, proposed a new way of looking at our involvement in the culture of what is popular and what we spend on how to get access to it. He called his theory the long tail, and wrote a book expanding his ideas about this market and cultural phenomenon in 2006. Aside from the interest this idea generated in the world of big business, it also illustrates the direction that our culture has moved as we all find connections, choices, and new acquaintance down this long tail. Most of us now take for granted the idea that we can immediately find information or buy products connected to an unusual interest that we have that may not be shared by anyone in our daily lives. As we explore the long tail, we have developed new literacies in search and information filtering skills. But our access to long-tail markets, citizens, and information is only as available as our connection to the Internet. How do threats to net neutrality threaten the relationships that we have built and the information we rely on in the long tail? Do we stand to lose our ability to move fluidly and at will up and down the tail in our personal and consumer lives? The name long tail describes the long trailing end of a power law distribution. A power law curve is a graph of a function where the value on the y-axis is equal to the value on the x-axis raised to some power. The curve that Anderson uses is a graph of y equal to x to the negative first, or y equal to 1 over x. They're the same. This is an inverse relationship, which means that as x gets larger, y gets smaller. So as you move along the bottom axis to the right, the sales rank of an item goes up, which means its popularity goes down, and the amount of money you earn from it, shown on the vertical axis, goes down. So for example, considering data for sales toward the left side of the curve, a book whose online sales are ranked number 10 might earn $400,000 in a year. Then skip along further to the right of the curve, and a book whose online sales are ranked number 900 might earn only $400 in the same period. Anderson's theory for business is that while on the left of the curve in the head you find the hits and mega hits of whatever category you have drawn the curve for instance profits from movie, book, or music sales, on the right there's still a huge number of sales because of the sheer number of items in the long tail. He asserts that if your business can keep populating the long tail with products, reviews, and recommendations, the collective sales made there will rival the profit from a few hits in the head. Most of what we humans are and produce is in this long tail, and this is a surprising concept for those of us who are used to hit culture. Anderson says, the vast majority of virtually everything, from music to clothing, is at best only modestly popular. Anderson labels our deference to hit culture scarcity thinking, where we consider that only a few things can be really good and worth buying because we are used to the concept that the number of things that can fit on a video store shelf or a bookstore shelf is equal to the number of good things that exist in that category. This scarcity thinking leads to implicit assumptions like, if it isn't a hit, it's a miss, or amateur equals amateurish, or if it were good, it would be popular. When in fact there are many high-quality products and ideas in the long tail that have never made it to hit status for a host of other reasons that have nothing to do with their quality. So the long tail is busy and full of good and not good things, all jumbled together. How do we find it all? In short, the internet industry has developed aggregation and filtering technologies, and we have developed new literacies in the realms of search and judgment about peer recommendation that steer us down the long tail. As we spend more time and money down the tail, more connections are made. We head further down the tail, and the tail grows fatter. According to Anderson, this interest and traffic away from the hits in the head of the curve changes the overall shape of the curve from a power law distribution. The curve now flattens at the head and thickens at the tail. Anderson's theory as a model for businesses has been challenged in recent years, most notably by Anita Elbersy in her book Blockbusters. Though in anecdotal defense of his theory, it's interesting to note that many of the brick-and-mortar businesses Anderson uses in his examples, businesses that were primarily dealing in the limits of shelf space and not capitalizing on the long tail, places like Borders, Blockbuster, Tower Records, they are no more. And whether or not investing in the long tail is ultimately a path to wealth and fortune, it undoubtedly contains and has facilitated connections between countless people who are sellers, buyers, fans, gamers, commenters, recommenders, and makers. These niche markets and niche interest groups that have developed in the long tail have connected us to each other in unprecedented ways. They have created the landscape of some of our most unlikely and most valued connections. The cultural connections of the long tail allows for us all to have choices that are outside of the lowest common denominator of our culture. Anderson reminds us that in the 1970s, our movie-watching choices on any given night were comprised of the offerings on 3 or 4 network TV channels, plus however many movie theaters were in our town. Exponential growth in movie viewing options has occurred as the decades roll past. We had first order of magnitude or ones of choices in the 70s, hundreds of choices in the 90s at the video store, and hundreds of thousands of choices now on streaming internet services like Netflix. This explosion of choice is reflected in many of our consumer and interest areas. This culture of choice extends to our choices in many areas of life. As we're driven down the long tail by search and recommendation, we also experience an increase in accessibility to online culture, since we have to learn new skills and new ways of interacting the further we get into niches. A person who previously only read news and watched movies online, for instance, might follow an interest in, say, Afro-Cuban jazz down the long tail, and along the way develop skills in search, file trading, leaving feedback, conducting transactions online, using recommendation to guide choices, writing a blog, or recording and uploading music files, ultimately finding one or several niches in which to pursue this interest. Blankshire and Noble identify the development of such skills as our Afro-Cuban jazz fan garnered in her trip down the long tail as attention transacting. This means that building skills in eliciting information from others, validating that information, and using it appropriately enhance the online literacy of the new long-tail explorer. The process is reciprocal when the attention paid and the attention received in an interaction serve to build and honor trust in online settings. When exploring another niche interest, the Afro-Cuban jazz fan will bring this set of skills to a new area and may end up helping to coach others who are just venturing into a new niche.
Net neutrality is the basic idea that access to the internet should be equal, not prioritized or discriminate. No one person or organization should have priority over another, regardless of user need. The current battle for net neutrality has an enormous impact on the relationships between people and their connections in the long tail. As stated before, the culture of choice extends down the long tail, providing us choices and options based on previous search queries and user recommendations. According to Michael Kastner's article, Goodbye Net Neutrality, Now What?, opposing net neutrality also gives internet service providers, also known as ISPs, the ability to give partiality or favorable attention to content providers. For example, under net neutrality, Comcast, which has a relationship with NBC, must provide the same level of service to ABC, a competitor of NBC. It would be redundant yet still important to say that if net neutrality fails, our choices and recommendations would be based off who our ISP is partnered with, not what similar people, unbiased individuals, have recommended to us. Network neutrality was considered a founding tenet of the Internet, which incorporated the common carrier laws. Simply stated, common carrier laws meant that a carrier must provide the general public services without discrimination. Before 1956, AT&T was undoubtedly the biggest phone and network provider. They made great effort to block out any outside entity to obtain access to their network. This included manufacturers and consumers. Only AT&T's hardware on their network. After the 1956 Hushaphone and Carter Phone's 1968 decisions, AT&T was to play nice with others and allow manufacturers to develop equipment to be used on its network. Also, AT&T was prevented in blocking the provision of enhanced data services on their network. These decisions were to be how telephone companies operated in the future. After the Internet was created, it was founded with telephonic technology in mind, meaning that the Internet would follow those same principles that telephone carriers utilize. This was good for the time in which it was created. As time progressed and technology became more advanced, the Internet began to change hands. 56K modems were being replaced with cable or DSL modems for a huge increase in Internet speed. It was at this point that major companies saw somewhat of a loophole. See, cable companies did not have to follow the same rules and telephone companies followed. In 2002, the FCC reclassified broadband internet access as an information service rather than a telecommunications service. By reclassifying, the FCC deregulated companies offering broadband in hopes that they would invest in its infrastructure. Those companies, however, took the deregulation to a different level by limiting traffic to specific web entities such as Comcast did to BitTorrent in 2007. The culture of choice has driven commerce in a much deeper direction than ever before. More people are listening to indie music, playing indie games, and reading fan fiction. These subcategories of each domain were hardly prevalent before, and now stand to lose ground quicker than they gained it if net neutrality is lost. Online learning is of great interest within this topic of study. At one time, you may have found that obtaining a bachelor's degree online would be a niche activity within the long portion of Anderson's long tail. Many traditionalists still have reservations about the online learner and somewhat degrade how those learners have obtained their degree. Now, however, according to Empire State College's undergraduate college catalog, nearly 20,000 students are enrolled annually, which represent every county in the state, and every state in the nation has students similarly represented. Online college coursework is a niche activity that has moved out of the long tail and into the head of the curve because of an explosion of interest and participation. Take into consideration what would happen if Empire State College didn't pay ISPs their premium fee for premium service. Those potential 20,000 college graduates are left with slow internet speeds, lost assignment submissions, and an unreliable method for the adult learner. Say they didn't pay for premium ISP service. This is the Comcast population that would be affected. So again, if Empire State College did not pay the premium to Comcast, 39 U.S. states would not have a suitable connection for online learning. In other words, 78% of the United States would be left with unreasonable internet coverage for online learning, and that is just one internet service provider. In short, net neutrality is extremely important to those of us who use the internet for all things digital. Our reliance on technology and the power of information provided by the internet has caused huge shifts in the way our society learns and in the way we connect to each other. We have just begun to understand how people today are learning for tomorrow. The preservation of net neutrality will allow us all to keep exploring and learning in the long tail together.